another episode of Curator on the Loose. I'm Matthew Burchette. I am the Senior Curator on the Loose at the Museum of Flight in Seattle, Washington. Now, pay attention. Today is a little bit different than all our other episodes. Why? Because I'm bringing it to you in a foreign language. We will have subtitles, so don't freak out. All right, you ready? Here we go. Okay. So beauty, eh? We're talking about this bird, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, that hoser's lost his mind. He's talking about an F-86. No way, take off. We're talking about the CL-13A. Eh? All right, enough of that. Truly, we are talking about the CL-13A, which is this guy. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it's an F-86. Well, you're kind of right. It's a license-built F-86 made by Canadair. In 1948, the Royal Canadian Air Force decided, you know what, we need to replace our little vampire fighters. So they started looking around and they settled on the F-86, and they approached the United States, specifically North American Aviation, and they said, hey, we want to build this thing in Canada, eh? Can we do it? North America said, sure, go ahead. So they started building F-86s, and they called them the CL-13. Why the F-86? Because in 1945, North American Aviation was given some really important documents from captured German sources, and they utilized that information to begin to design this guy, the F-86. One of the things that went into the design was the swept wing. That was kind of a new deal back in 45. And in 47, they already had a flight test aircraft. And in 48, this thing had broken the sound barrier. All right, I know what you're yelling right now. No, it didn't. Well, yes, it did, but it was in a dive, so it really didn't count. Anyway, so the Canadians really wanted a more advanced fighter than the little British Vampire they were flying. So they settled on this guy, and it was an amazing fighter for them. Came in 6 different marks. The Mark I was basically an F-86A. The Mark II was an F-86E. The Mark III was an F-86E, but it used an Orinda Canadian-built engine. And the Mark IV was basically a Mark II, but with a couple of changes. And then the Mark V, which is what this guy is, was also powered by an Orinda engine, but an up-powered engine, so it had a much better flight capability. And then the Mark VI was the ultimate Canadian Sabre. One of the cool things about this aircraft is we know its entire history. It was delivered to the Royal Canadian Air Force in 1955. And it did duty in what they called their OTU, which is Operational Training Unit. Basically, it taught Sabre pilots how to be Sabre pilots, and it did that for many years until the OTU then became the Sabre Transition Team. Now, what does that mean? Well, the Canadians knew they needed kind of a higher performance aircraft than the F-86. So the Sabre Transition Team was the lead-in aircraft for the CF-104. So think license-built Lockheed F-104 Starfighter. And it did that for many years until 1963. And that's when the Canadians retired the old F-86s or CL-13s in favor of the CF-104. Now, what happened to these guys? Well, they all basically got sold off or scrapped, but Colonel Arnie Bauer, who ran the OTU and Sabre Transition Team, decided for what they called the Sabre Swan, he was going to fly this particular bird, his own personal mount, from Chatham in New Brunswick all the way out here to the West Coast and then back again, kind of as a final swan song for the F-86. And he did that, and it made some pretty good headlines and was actually, when you think about it, pretty cool for the day. After Colonel Bauer's Sabre Swan flight in 1969, he took this very same bird on the absolute last CL-13 flight in 1969. She flew out of Chatham, New Brunswick again and went into storage. After being in storage, she was bought up by Maritime Aircraft Overhaul and Repair, and they took her and turned her into a Mark 6 and were going to sell her to Pakistan. But the war had just broken out between India and Pakistan, and the Canadian government said, "Oh, no way." And so she was sold to Boeing instead. Now, what the heck did Boeing do with her? They turned her into a chase plane, and she was there for the first flight of the 747. That is really cool. And she flew with Boeing until 1991 as a chase plane. And when she came to us, she was still in a really neat livery, and I think we've got some photos we can probably post to show you. All right, here's your fun fact for today. Did you know that aviatrix Jackie Cochran flew a CL-13 to 2 world records in 1953? It's true. She also became the first woman to go supersonic, and in a CL-13. Now, why did she use a CL-13? It's actually easy. She went to the Air Force and said, "Hey, I'd like to borrow one of your F-86s," and they went, "No, not gonna happen." So she went to the Canadians, and the Canadians, in their typical way, said, Okay, here is your homework for today. Google Golden Hawks. It's the aerial demonstration team that Canada put together from 1959 to 1964, and they flew CL-13s. Talk about a cool looking paint job. All right, thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of the CL-13, It was beauty. We really appreciate you guys continuing to watch. If you've got questions or comments, hit us up on YouTube, Facebook, and you can even send us an email at curator@museumofflight.org. We will certainly answer your questions. Now, one other thing. You'll notice I'm not wearing my normal collared Museum of Flight polo. Oh no, today I'm styling and profiling in ba-bam! This bad boy. Where did I get it? The museum store! And you can too! We have tons in there. I did not clear us out. So make sure to go check out the museum store online, and if you buy $50 worth of t-shirts, we'll ship them to you for free. All right, actually, if you buy $50 of anything, we'll ship them to you for free. We're not just, high on t-shirts today, but I am, because I look great. Today we're speaking Canadian, That's a Sabre, a Canadair Sabre. Taking this old girl into storage. She was later sold